Do you want to state your name and the year you were born?
Uh, Thomas Gentry, 1953.
So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Scotland County here in North Carolina.
So, how was your life as a kid? Were your parents farmers? Were you involved in that at all?
No, my grandparents had actually been farmers and had moved into a very, very small city from the farm. Uh, I think, their opportunity to improve their lot in life. I can remember my grandfather telling me how he kind of got turned against farmers because he was actually sharecropping um, during the Great Depression. And he said trainloads of men would come down from the north and they'd hop off the train and they'd go through the fields at night just grabbing raw cabbage, anything they could find to eat because they were starving. And the people for whom he sharecropped told him they needed to start shooting these men. And he said he couldn't do that. So he wanted to get away from those people telling him how he had to live his life and everything.
That makes sense. So, how was your life as a child different than children today?
Well, in that part of North Carolina that I was raised in, there was a small Indian population. And of course, we had black schools and white schools. There was segregation. But the Indians were kind of stuck with where do we put them? And there were not enough Indian students to open an Indian school. So they had us go to school with the whites. But unfortunately, we ended up going to school with the wealthiest whites. And I don't know if that was to maybe give them some relief from guilt or what. I don't know. It was very beneficial as far as I was concerned. Had better teachers uh, and much better food. And I always found it ironic that the lady who was in charge of the cafeteria was a white lady, but everyone who worked in subservient roles to her were blacks, and they were very, very partial to the Indian kids there. I mean, when we went through line, you could just tell we got bigger portions of food. If there were, you could go back and get seconds then, and they saved it for us. They would actually tell some students there were no leftovers until we got there, and they would give them to them. So it was kind of like the minority stuck together, you know, and it it was interesting, but it was painful at times too. I was very, very much into education and just starving for learning as a child. As far back as my memory goes. And I had an aunt who was 3 years older than me. And when she came home from school, starting in the first grade, she'd share what she learned with me. So, I may have been barely 4 years old, but I was learning what she was learning in the first grade. And this progressed through time. And by the time I was ready to start school, she was ready to start the fourth grade. So I was reading, writing, and knew my numbers and everything. So I was eager to get into school, and then she would tell me about the libraries and the books, and you could go in, and it's just fascinating, just unbelievable that there was a place like that. And I so look forward to going to school. And on the first day of school, she took me by and dropped me off at the classroom, and I walked in and I saw these little desks, and each desk had a name taped in the corner of it, and I saw Thomas on the desk, and I went over and I touched that name tag, and I hopped in that seat, and I'm in school now. And the teacher came over and grabbed me by the shoulder and walked me over to the row next to the window. That's where the Indian students sat. And it was a different Thomas whose name was on that desk. So I learned very quickly that this is the way it was. But my cousins hadn't shared that with me. They didn't talk about it because it was a thing you tried to just block out, you know. But it wasn't that. It was, to me, it was very beneficial to have been treated that way because at that moment, as I was being walked away from that desk, I can remember thinking to myself, I'm going to be the best student they ever have. I'm going to be top. And tried, and most of the time I was. Fortunately, thanks to God.
So you mentioned being Native American. Do you know the tribe you're part of?
Well, my mother's
or-
Lumbee. My father was Creek from the southern part of Alabama. And it's funny, there's only one federally recognized tribe in Alabama now. Part of his family is on the reservation there. Some had left. Um, but my mother's unrecognized. My father's tribe was recognized. And at that time, there was kind of like button of heads. So my father's people didn't like my mother's people. My mother's people didn't like my father's people. So it was a strange situation. Uh, I'm very proud of my dad. He's one of the first paratroopers from the state of Florida, and he served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and he is a true patriot. And I never got to know him that well, but I know his history, and I'm proud of that.
I am curious, it's kind of off topic. How do you feel knowing that the Lumbee tribe is now recognized in North Carolina as a tribe?
Well, the federal recognition part really doesn't bother me that much. I was exposed to many things. We're jumping out of track here, but as a young man, the American Indian movement was getting started around the time of the Vietnam War. And, you know, some of these groups you had to take, disavow your allegiance to the United States to become a part of that group. And from getting to know some of these people, who some of them became prominent later, not name dropping, but the different tribes, it's like a pie, you know, and everybody, all the recognized tribes get slices of the pie. So the more tribes that are recognized, the smaller the slices that each nation gets. So each of those nations already receiving money, they don't want any other nations to be getting a share of the pie. And the Lumbees probably have the largest number of people. Now, that too kind of touches a sore point because at one point there had to be more of a tie to be recognized as a member of the tribe. Those things, as time has changed, have got more lax. So there's less and less of a requirement to be able to call yourself a Lumbee. But I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of the things that it brought me in life, the opportunities it gave me in some ways. And in some ways, it held you back, you know. And it would be very easy to become bitter, and a lot of people did. But it was just, I think my understanding was it's part of the times. It's those things you go through, and it's not going to always stay the same.
And going back to you being a kid in the 1950s, what were general examples of prices that you paid for items that you can remember, just generally?
I can remember because of things that I seldom ever got. Uh, Soft drinks being about a nickel or even less at that point. And we didn't get a lot of things like that because we didn't have a lot of money. So we pretty much raised our own food. You know, my grandmother had a huge garden back behind her house. So, you know, corn and bean and canning foods and stuff like that. Most of the things we got were rock candy. You know, the really extremely cheap candy, but I love to get it, and I'd love to have some now because of the memories it brings back. I don't remember a lot of the prices because we didn't buy a lot.
It's okay.
It was, I remember we could get 2 crackers for a penny. So if you found a penny on the ground, you know, you felt rich, you know. And my father came to visit one time, and he gave my sister and I and my cousins, he gave each of us a quarter. Never had a quarter before, never. And just to go into a store and to be able to buy a quarter's worth of stuff, you get a big bag back then. You know, there were so many 2 for a penny items. A little kid it's better than Halloween.
Did you have any role models when you were younger, and why were they people you looked up to?
My grandfather was a very religious man. He was he he found the Lord later in life, but he's a short man. He was of short stature, and very powerful. And he worked for the city there and the lights and departments and all. And I can remember the story of two of the men he worked with were big guys, 6'3", whatever. My grandpa was probably 5'6", and they were picking at him for being small, telling him he wasn't a man. And I never got tired of them telling the story. He walked over and picked the front end of a car. Now they weren't as heavy as they are now, but they were heavy. He picked the front end of a car off the ground, and they shut up. He showed them. Uh, I think he got discriminated against a lot because he was even darker than most of Mother Lambe's, and he. I remember him being called to the city council and actually being asked to run for mayor because they thought so many people would vote for him, and him saying, I don't need to run for mayor. I'm already unofficial mayor anyway." So he's a good man. He was my role model.
What is the earliest event or person of historical significance that you remember?
Well, it's two factors. I'm glad you asked that because you know me and you know my sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
The Cuban Missile Crisis, I don't think people really understand as much. And I was in lower grades at the time, but when we went to school, and it was all over the news, and people were constantly looking on their little black and white TVs, on these massive TVs we have now, and everybody was focusing in on it. We're getting ready to go to war with Russia over Cuba and atomic missiles and everything, and this is what had happened in World War in Japan, and those memories were still fresh, and a lot of the people had lived through World War II and had either seen the devastation, via television or lived through it. It was scary. People were terrified. It was one of those times when people thought this might be the end of the world, or at least the end of the United States. Who knows? And teachers were teaching us how to crouch in school and everything. And that leaves a major impression on a small kid. And the thing that always will stick in my mind is our town was a small town. It was about 40 miles from Fort Bragg, so there were always a lot of soldiers there in the area. And a young soldier had been in an automobile accident, and the hospital was directly across from the elementary school I went to. So this soldier had been in an accident, and they had to try to airlift him back to Bragg because they were trying to get him as quickly as they could. And without any notice or anything, they sent a helicopter to pick him up. And this hot helicopter landed in the playground of our school. And the teachers didn't know about it. The students obviously didn't know about it. And this one girl that I grew up with, named Elaine, when that helicopter started landing, she took off running. She lived about a mile and a half away. She ran all the way home. She was so frightened. She knew that it was the Russians coming in. And it's something I share with people and laugh about and everything else. But I was talking to my wife just the other night about it. I said, really, never really dawned on me how terrified must she have been to run that far and everything, and what was going through her mind. And my heart just aches for her now. We didn't at the time, and until recently, I didn't think about the fear. But that's what was put in a lot of people at that time. Kennedy was really, almost by a big chunk of the country, almost idolized and truly hated. Uh, when when he was assassinated, I was at school and we were watching a movie about the functioning of the heart. Bell Telephone made movies for schools back in the day, and it was about the function of the heart. And right in front, in the middle of the movie, they shut the movie down. They turned on the lights. We were in the school auditorium, and they told us that he'd been shot. And they stopped school right then. Well, we had a bus that ran into the area that I lived, but we seldom rode the bus. We'd always walk or raced the bus to see who could get. We just walked home, and even without having a lot of understanding of politics and what it meant and all, just seeing our teachers cry and everything, it's pretty devastating.
That makes sense. Do you live in it?
Good.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay. So how many years did you attend school? Did you attend all of school?
Well, I went through the ninth grade without missing a day in public school, and I was fortunate enough to have an English teacher who really thought highly of me, and she had recommended me to several prep schools, Andover, Exeter, and Woodbury Forest, and Woodbury Forest was in Virginia, and it was the closest to home. And that's the one I wanted. I didn't want to go that far away from home. I didn't want to go up north where it snowed a lot and everything. So I ended up being interviewed and given offered a scholarship and accepted and went there. I was there. I didn't attend much. I don't know. Looking back and being honest, I'm a recovering alcoholic, so there are parts of my life I have little memory of. But I know that at some point very early on, I realized that they had never had an Indian student go to the school. And here I am being offered a scholarship to go to the school, and I'm questioning why. And it was I was a guinea pig. Wanted to see how I was accepted, how I would do in school, and everything, so that they were looking at forced desegregation, and they'd lose. They'd be in bad financial situation if they didn't do so. So I think that embittered me a little bit. I didn't want to be a guinea pig. I did well enough to be here, and again, that thing about I'm going to prove my first. They sent me there at summer school because I'm coming from a small North Carolina school to one of the top ranked prep schools in the United States, and at that time, and I had to prove I could handle the workload and everything. So they sent me to summer school, and I led the summer school. I graduated first in all the students there, so that proved I could be there. But I think that little bitterness might have caused me not to be apply myself as much. But even though I didn't do well, and then I battled my alcoholism, I was offered a scholarship to Dartmouth University under a program for American Indians, and uh, unfortunately, I was dismissed from school and had to give up my scholarship to Dartmouth and everything. But I'm grateful I'm here where I am today, and God has blessed me.
Was everyone in your family able to attend school, and what level did they reach if they weren't?
Uh, I'm just trying to think a minute so I can be accurate. I think that I'm pretty sure, almost positive that I was the first one to get any college. Uh, and again, uh, for reasons, I didn't stay long. I went to I was accepted into the honors program at UNC and loved it. But unfortunately, the alcohol would come back in and into play. So, and we kind of skipped over my whole military service in the military, and when I was going on the GI Bill to go, I was happy to be in college. I had actually gone to college a little bit before I went into the Army. The one of the master's teachers that I had at Woodbury Forest had gone on to the University of Virginia and was a higher level in admissions there. And there's a small St. Andrews Presbyterian College was a college at the time. I walked in, and told them what I thought I could do, and they gave me a scholarship to go to the school there. And my friend at UVA said that if I could go the first semester and graduate with a B or higher average, they'd give me a diploma to Woodbury Forest, and they would open the door for me to attend UVA. But I drank my way out of that too. And that's one of the things that Native American people have is an issue with alcohol. A lot of us, not all of us.
Did your parents attend school, or did they stop at a certain level?
You know, I know my grandparents. My grandmother never went to school. My grandfather, I think, went to the third grade. But I think he's one of the smartest men I've ever met. He could do math in his head. It was mind blowing. And people said about him that if he wasted a penny in a year, that was a bad year for him. But he could do complex math in his head. How he learned, I don't know. My grandmother actually learned how to read from the Bible. Just hearing people read the Bible and her. And I can remember she didn't go to school, but she could say the alphabet backwards faster than I could say it forwards. And that was something for her to be proud of. So that taught me not to equate education and intelligence. Never, never fall into that trap. Uh, Most of my family dropped out of school. Most of my family in that time period. Uh, I think with some of the girls, they wanted to get away from the life that they were in, poor and what have you. It was near brag, so they would marry soldiers. It was to escape the life. There weren't many opportunities as far as school or colleges to go to, and there was no money to go. Um, so it wasn't a high priority for them.
How were schools different then than they are now? I know you've talked about segregation, but how was just schooling in general?
I believe that almost all, close to 99% of those who were educating children at the time I was young were there because they wanted to be. They had a desire to be teachers. Unfortunately, today, you find a lot of those folks who are getting degrees in areas they can't find a job, but they have a college degree so they can get a teacher's certificate, and now they're teaching kids. That's not what they want to do. That's not fulfilling to them. That's not where their heart has led them to set their goals early on. And I think that was a tremendous difference. I think back then, uh, teachers took a lot more individual interest in their students. Uh, Most of them were loving mothers. Most of them. I didn't have a male teacher in North Carolina until I was in the eighth grade, the year before I went away to prep school. I never had a male teacher. They were all female. And most of them very good. Some of them prejudiced, but they were very good teachers. I don't think we have that now. I remember going to a school where one of my kids was going, and there was a girl who, it was her first year teaching, they were introducing the new teachers, and she stood up, and the first thing she said, "I ain't very good at public speaking." And I thought, oh, you poor child. You tainted yourself right there. Don't mean to ramble.
I'm not rambling.
Okay.
No, you're answering.
But I think there's a lot more dedication then. And even there was less wasted time. And history and civics were more important back then. And I think that the young were being taught more about the value that our history has for us. And when when we look at the schools and when they desegregated, they didn't change what they were teaching because of the desegregation. You know, we still learned about the Civil War and slavery and what was going on at that time. There was no issue, you know. I still remember a guy named Robert Terry. He was one of my best friends in school. He was black. But before they did segregate the schools, we played together anyway. You know, we didn't live close to each other, but if we were out in the woods and we ran across each other, you start playing together. And even when discrimination became an issue here in North Carolina, at some of the high schools and all, they had to send the highway patrol to be there when the first black students came. But a lot of what you saw happening was people wanting to be on TV. You know, these same guys that were wanting to fight all of a sudden prior to the blacks coming into their school, they were playing with them and being friends with them. You know, so a lot of it was manufactured, and a lot of it was parents and the way the parents felt. You know, it wasn't so much the kids.
You mentioned being in the service. Before you were in the service and during, which wars do you remember living through, and which war did you serve in?
Okay, I didn't get to serve in the war. I joined to go to Vietnam. I went in on delayed entry program, and Nixon had frozen the troop movements by the time that I came out. I was with not the last group of draftees. Some of the draftees I was with were some of the last ones to be sent to Vietnam. Uh, but that was a very, very wild and crazy time. Prior to that, when they were having the marches in Washington, D.C., I'm going to prep school in Charlottesville, Virginia. So D.C. was a place we kind of hung around. So it was cool to go there and be a part of the demonstrations against the war. But it wasn't, I didn't know anything about it. My family was fighting the wars. You know, all my uncles served in the military, most in the 82nd Airborne, one in the Navy. But to be a part of a big crowd partying and having fun and getting high, that's what a lot of that was about. A lot of people didn't know anything about the war. They weren't protesting. I think it's very similar to some of the things going on today, where you see these large crowds and you have a reporter go up and ask them a question about the subject they're protesting about. They don't know anything. If somebody had come and stuck a microphone in the face of most of those protesting the Vietnam War, they wouldn't have known what they were talking about. Some of them would have been protesting about maybe getting drafted, you know, but they didn't put a lot of thought into it because you get the permits for going to school, and most of the kids going to Vietnam were kids that grew up in my neighborhoods or neighborhoods like mine around the country, the poor kids, you know. I went to school at Woodbury with a guy named John Funkhauser. He was our quarterback. He's all prep, everything. And he went to Princeton. He was a backup quarterback for the Princeton team. When he got a very low draft number, like 7 or 9, which means you can get drafted early. He got a physical deferment. He's playing full college football, and he got a physical deferment. So I think that was part of what was egging on a lot of the protest about is who was getting drafted and who was serving. But it was a lot of the wealthy, young Ivy League schoolers or those who had grown up in wealthy families who were doing a lot of the protesting.
What parts did you or your family play at home on the battlefield in the wars that you lived through?
Well, I mentioned my dad, and he's been dead for a long time now. He died when I was 16, but on his marker, he served in Vietnam, Korea, and World War II. But he had chose to have the unit he was in World War II put on his tombstone. So I think there's the youngness of the men in battle created a closeness. I have an uncle who died from being exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. I had an uncle who came back. He had served in World War II. He was in Korea. He came back. And now they would call it PTSD. They didn't know what it was back then, but he wouldn't sleep laying down for some reason. They found him dead sitting on the floor beside a chair where something in his mind told him he had to be like that. He died at a very young age. Uh, I had uncles who were in the Green Beret uh, in Special Forces back then that were wounded. My Uncle Paul, he loved it. He got wounded 3 times. He was one of those few that didn't want to come home when he got wounded. It does a lot of different things to different people. And I never really got to talk to him about it much, but if being a part of war makes you enjoy and want to be part of it, just a little something out of kilter there, you know. But I cannot think of a single one of my relatives, and most of them got drafted who served, that regretted it. I volunteered and regretted it because I didn't get to go. I felt like I was obligated. The rest of my family had gone. It was my turn to go, you know. And I should fulfill that, you know, because it's like an obligation to your country, to your family. And I didn't go. I served. They call me a Vietnam era veteran, but I didn't go. You know, yeah, that's always been a kind of a thorn in my side. But I come from a very patriotic family. Uh, None of the women in my family served until one of my cousins went in, and she was an officer in the Air Force. She didn't retire. She didn't stay in long enough to retire. She served, and she was finally the first one in our family to get a college degree. Uh-oh.
Good.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not you. It was a spam call.
Oh, I thought I talked too long
No,
and killed your
no.
battery.
It's still good. It was a spam
You
call.
can edit this, right?
I'm gonna edit it down.
Okay, good.
The plan is to put questions in and then have your answer, and then another question and then an answer. That way, it's a little easier for my
And
teacher to get. So you're
Okay,
good.
and I'm running my mouth too much.
No, you're not at all. We will edit it to be like the right order.
Okay.
So you can say anything in any order, and I can edit it to fit the questions. So if you
Okay.
mention something that fits in a better spot, it doesn't matter at all.
Okay.
I'll edit it.
That just
No
makes
matter
more
what
work
happens.
for you, but I'm good.
It will work really well. So obviously you've talked about being impacted by racial segregation. How was you mentioned the minorities sticking together? How did it feel when you witnessed the civil rights movement as a Native American?
I'm giving this deep thought. I can remember uh, George Wallace came through the little town that I was raised in. Uh, and more a curiosity thing than anything else. And he ended up being shot not long after. That was when he was running for president. Um, I'll be honest, at the time, I was just wishing it would hurry up and get over with. I just wanted it to be done because there were too many people being hurt by it. And, you know, you'd hear about a church being blown up, little black girls inside of it. And I've always had a soft heart. And then you hear about people being hung and stuff like that. And it makes you wonder why people have to treat each other that way. So it was a very confusing time for me, you know, because I felt like there were times I couldn't be accepted by whites and I couldn't be accepted by blacks. But I could be accepted easier by most whites than they would accept blacks. I could be accepted a little bit easier by most blacks than you would whites. But it was never a full acceptance. You know, you're being accepted because you're different, not because you're a part of. that's not the same. So it was kind of bad, but I remember being told the Ku Klux Klan came to Robertson County. I think it was in the late 50s. It was the Time magazine did a big write up about it and everything. And I don't know that they wrote the whole story, the true story, or whatever. All I know is they announced they were going to have a rally in Robertson County, which is where the hotbed and most of the Lumbee tribe was at that time. And they had gathered out on the field, and some of those country boys come riding up on the pickup trucks with shotguns and rifles, and the Klan's never been back. They took us, scared the boys to death. And it was a big joke. It was a big joke. Because those guys weren't scared of any discrimination one on one. But it's the strangest thing. My Uncle Cliff, the uncle I mentioned who passed away sleeping on the floor, he actually cut a man one time for not holding the door open for a black woman. And I never heard any other story except for that. But evidently, this man had said something unnecessarily to this elderly black lady. And Cliff didn't like him, cut him. So I guess that guy didn't. He probably started opening a few more doors.
So, yeah. We've talked about the Kennedy assassination. Do you remember where you were, what you were doing when the moon landing happened? Any thoughts you had about that at the time?
I think I was at Woodbury Forest, and they were actually televising it, and they had it on in the auditorium. So we were all able to go and be watching a lot of it when we could, especially those who cared to stay up late. It was a big deal. It was a very big deal. I remember I had the feeling of pride, that we had gotten there. We beat the Russians. That was the big thing back then. We beat the Russians. And I do remember so many people not believing it was real, especially those like my grandparents who had grown up and when they were young, they very seldom got to see a picture. And then the movies they saw were, black and white and sketchy, and all of a sudden you're seeing footage from the movie that looked like the old movies they'd seen. And they didn't believe anybody had walked on the moon for real. So it's kind of something, for me, here I am and I'm part of school, and there's really one of the minds, Leon Zirkle had worked in Tennessee working on the development, helping to develop the nuclear bomb. And he and I grew close. So I'm dealing with that. And then on the other hand, I've got my grandparents who don't believe that men walked on the moon. So it's dichotomy, just being stretched in both directions. But I can remember it actually pulled people together in the country. And I think that's all races. The pride was crossed all lines and all barriers at that time.
Do you remember Watergate? Where you were, what you knew about it at the time? Adults were saying that you were young.
Oh, yes. First time I voted for president, I voted for Gus Hall, the Communist Party candidate. Not because I was a communist, but I didn't want Hubert Humphrey or Richard Nixon, either one. So I wanted to vote, but I didn't want to vote for those guys. So I voted. I always kind of felt like there was more to the story than what we got told, and it really seemed like a setup to me. Nixon had just gone to China, and there was some concern about he was getting too friendly with the Chinese. I think I got it right, sequence. I'm 70-something years old now, but there were some things he did that I think made him a target for people on his own side as well as the Democratic side. I'm not sure that the two guys who wrote the book were 100% honest. Uh, I don't think there was a lot of doubt at the time, but I've always had an inquiring mind, and I would talk to a few small group of people, and they were going, something's just not right. Something's just not right. You know, you've got these amateur guys doing things they shouldn't be doing, and who knew to be looking for that to begin with. But it did shake the country a lot, and him having to resign, and Agnew being one of the worst choices that could have been for him. But it threw our country into flux.
Last question before we take a little break, so you can drink and walk around if you need to. I hate to mention it, and it was very traumatizing for many people, but 9/11, the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Your memory.
I had gotten to work that morning, and I had gone to work for Pepsi, and I was the production planner, so all my work is done on the computer. But I seldom got on the internet. I'm doing my job. When the guy in the office next to me came running in there and said, "Hey man, did you see what happened?" I said, "What?" He said, "Some idiot just flew into the World Trade Center." And I said, "Nah." He said, "Yeah, so I turned on the internet, and I'm watching, and I'm going, oh my goodness." And I'm thinking, that guy didn't accidentally hit that building. Just the thoughts going through my head and everything. And as I'm watching, a few minutes later, here comes the second plane. And wow, that that was real then. I mean, this world was going to war. And then, I had a cousin working at the Pentagon when it got hit. Uh, just the different things, and you just kept hearing more and more and more. And I remember thinking a lot of people are going to die because of this. A lot of people are going to die. And my son joined the military because of it. He just he stayed and retired from the military, but it was his duty, you know. And 9/11, when it happened, my wife and I, they closed down the office. I mean, things were shutting down. Uh, my wife and I went to the beach with her best friend and her friend's boyfriend, and we just spent the weekend there just to try to get away. But the TV's on the whole time. You couldn't get away from it because you wanted to know what was going on. Uh, is there more coming? How quickly are we going to respond? And just the tremendous damage and loss of life. But it brought this country together in a way that was awesome.